And maybe you may introduce yourselves more about this. And trước kia nó biên đã có bé bên translator chứ từ các thằng như làm phòng này các bạn. But you very proud that how you student educate English in 6 hours per week from year 1 until year 3, right? And then I think that you may have the English proficiencies in terms of listening to Dr. Mark for his presentation. But I request you that to speak one, to speak slowly for them to understand your English. But some of them have very high English proficiency. They may understand you well, but some of those may have the rudimentary English. And yeah, so I'm here, and also Dr. Vinh Phnom can also clarify, and Mr. Dana and also our police here can clarify, can add to what you could not understand in his English, but English is native speaker, so yeah, good English, yeah. So thank you so much, Dr. Dani, and this floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. And Happy New Year, everybody. Great to see so many people. So I'm just curious, who here is undergraduate, BA, bachelor? Raise your hand. Okay. Bachelor. Yeah.
Bachelor degree.
Okay, good. And then who here is master's degree? Okay. And who here is no degree? So I will be presenting my research about flooding. I don't know how to use the Mac. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so my title is Don't Always Blame Climate Change, Uneven Development, and Vulnerability to Flooding in Southeast Asian Megacities. And this was flooding around Bangkok in 2011. So my PhD thesis actually focused on these floods. So to introduce the topic, in recent years there have been bad flooding in Southeast Asia. For example, Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, big city, like 15 million people in Jakarta. And many years they have flooding. And so, for example, in 2020, they had floods that killed 53 people. And so the government officials in response said, this is one of the most extreme rainfall. And another said the impact of a 1 degree increase in global temperatures, right? Because of climate change can be severe. Among that is these floods. So saying that flooding is a result of climate change. In Manila, they have cyclones. And the previous president, Rodrigo Duterte, said the problem is whether we accept it or not, climate change. The warm climate that boils the Pacific Ocean, there's a lot of water vapor accumulating into so much rain. And in Bangkok, the floods I just talked about, in 2011, killed 800 people, $45 million in damage. The Japanese economy actually shrunk because there's so many Japanese investment in Thailand. And so the Deputy Prime Minister, Kitirat Naranong, declared that the flooding, quote, has to be as a result of climate change and global warming. So as you can see here, the government in these countries saying that flooding is a result of climate change. Why are they doing this? Why are they saying that this is the result of climate change? Well, one is they're saying it's not my fault. It's not our fault that these people died, that there's damage. It's also easier to blame. It's easier to blame somebody outside, right? To blame God, to blame nature, or blame Western countries, right, the US, for causing climate change, than their own problems. So this is called a framing. But I say that this framing is always political, because the way risk is framed influences policy and practice responses. So if you blame climate change, that means we need to build more flood walls, right? We need to raise the defenses around the city. We need to block the flood water, build more dams. But I'm saying this framing fails to talk about the social and political economic causes that make people vulnerable in the first place. So I disagree. I certainly think climate change is happening. I'm not a climate change denier like Donald Trump. I think climate change is certainly worsening, making things worse. I certainly think Southeast Asian countries are vulnerable to climate change. But I think there's another cause. And so urban floods are also socially and politically produced. They are actually as a result of urban development. Also political decisions, economic interests, and power relations. But also some groups are affected more. So vulnerability basically means how likely are you going to be affected by the floods? Are you going to get sick? Are you going to die? Are you going to get injured? Or will you lose your house or your motorbike? So that's what vulnerability is. And so I'm saying it's uneven. And so the groups that are affected are marginalized, often low-income, slum communities. So I will show this by looking at 3 major cities in Southeast Asia: Bangkok, Jakarta, and Manila. I think they're actually the 3 biggest cities in the region. So they're called mega cities because they're like about 10 million or more. So in engineering, traditionally, the idea is you want to stop floodwater from entering, like the river from overflowing. And so you build these flood walls. So vulnerability then is just seen as exposure, how much water. So those who are affected are just happen to be at the wrong place. They're unlucky. It's not, say you guys are affected, it's just you're unlucky. It's not because where you live in the city. Or you guys this time. And so the problem is a lot of social scientists have critiqued this approach. What happens if the flood walls break? Why are some groups affected more than other groups? So you saw this in many other floods in other cities. Like in the US in Hurricane Katrina, black people in particular were affected the most by floods. And this is in 2004. In India, you have flooding, and you have slum communities in India affected the most. So it's not only Southeast Asia, but the patterns of who is affected and not affected is unequal. So I use this approach called urban political ecology. And it's a little complicated, so I will try to explain it simply or summarize it. But it sees that cities are combinations of nature and social. Humans are the ones who construct cities. And so they're also landscapes of power. And they're uneven spaces of vulnerability. So for example, wealthy people will live in higher areas. Or, for example, they might fill in the land around housing estates. While poor people will live along canals, live along the river, or railroads. So, and the government is key, because the government is the one who builds flood walls. They control urban planning, land use planning. So the idea is there's no such thing as a natural disaster. When I teach my students, I say never use the term natural disaster, because when it involves humans, there's a social part. And so this is from Hurricane Katrina. And so this is in the US. And the US is not a perfect country. There's certainly problems still there too. And so black people in particular were the ones who suffered the most during these. And I teach about this in my classes. So they say, no, the water is rising, please help. So whenever you had the TV at the time, you would have black people in particular. And that's because they couldn't afford to leave the city. They lived in the areas which were that had the worst housing. And so look at the idea of power in influencing vulnerability. The other thing I want to bring out is the idea of environmental justice. This is a term used by some scholars. So when you have flooding, there are three types of environmental justice. One is distributed. So let's say we have floods come right now. So a fair in terms of distribution is everybody is affected, say right here. But maybe the government says these are poor people. We want to protect the rich people. So they push all the flood water here, right? And they protect this area right here. That's not fair in terms of distribution. The other is in terms of procedure. Who makes the decision? Who does everybody get to say? The poor people, are they asked about? And then finally is recognition. Are all people recognized? So environmental justice also should be part of policy when it comes to flooding. So now I will look at these three cities of Bangkok, Manila, and Jakarta. And any questions about this? So we're looking at city planning or lack of city planning. So what happened in these countries? So Japan played a key role. Japan invested heavily in manufacturing. So Japan appreciated its currency after pressure from the US. So they invested a lot in manufacturing and factories in Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia in the 1980s. So this meant that there was a lot of factories being built. And they built them a lot in these cities because these cities have the airport, they have the universities there, they have the government offices. And so but the land not in the city center but on the outside of the city was the cheapest. So they built the factories there in those places. And so this meant there was, starting in the 1980s, there was big transformation in these cities. So this is Bangkok right here. Bangkok is right here. You have the Chao Phraya River that goes into Bangkok. And then here you have the extended Bangkok metropolitan region. And these were where a lot of the factories were built. The problem is, what type of land can hold the most flood water? Forests or rice fields, but if you turn them into concrete, there's nowhere for the water to go. Or you need to say, all right, we're going to put the water here, so this area won't be flooded. So the government encouraged investment. In Indonesia, the price of crops were falling. So Suharto, the previous president of Indonesia, said we're going to open up Indonesia to the global assembly line. So they built factories, airports, and gave tax breaks. Thailand too invested heavily, invited the military alliance with the US. And they also advanced the role of urban industrialists. And the greatest share of foreign investment was in Bangkok. In Manila, foreign direct investments skyrocketed. And so they also deregulated, decentralized. So the growth was concentrated in outer areas. These areas actually grew faster than the city center on the core. They call this peri-urban areas. So migrants were the ones who moved the most. And so that the core populations of these cities grew a little bit, but the non-core areas grew much faster. And that's because of the lower cost of land. So there's also, and these people needed somewhere to live. So there was a real estate boom on the outside of these cities. So a number of scholars have called this form of urbanization peri-urbanization. But the problem was this increased the risk of floods, particularly land use change. So in Bangkok, the built-up area, the concretized area, increased 400%. In Jakarta, the green area, rice fields, forests, was 35%, but now 9%. In Manila, there was deforestation. And instead they built malls, condominiums, and gated residential development. So this is a map of Bangkok. So you can see in 1953, so there was flooding in the 1940s in Bangkok. Bangkok has many canals. And so there was a video of people happily playing in the floodwater in their boats in the 1940s. But this changed as the city developed. And as you can see, it just kind of spread out everywhere. There wasn't land use planning. And so this, as you can see, happened. Also, what they did is they filled in many canals. There were many canals that were used to retain water during floods. And so what developers did is they built new roads, they built housing estates. And so under the law, if you own the land, you can fill the canal in. And so they wanted to build large land. And so here you can see in Bangkok, for example, that of the canals that are filled in, 97% are in private land. But the one that's still open, most of them are on public land. And then finally, land subsidence. That means the land is actually dropped. It's sinking. And that's bad for flooding because it takes longer for the floodwater to get out. So since the 1970s, Bangkok's land has sunk more than 1 degree. 1 meter. And Jakarta over 4 meters. Over 40% of Jakarta is below sea level. Manila is sinking. And this is a lot due to groundwater pumping. We pump the water from the ground for factories or for drinking water. And so this means that it's harder to get floodwater out, but also the height of the flood walls sink. And so in particular along the coast, it's a problem. So here you can see a map of Jakarta. And you can see here it's below 4 meters in terms of sea level. And so whenever you have storm surges, these areas flood in Jakarta. Jakarta is the worst in terms of actually land subsidence. And here you can see in Bangkok how much groundwater they've used. So why do I say it's uneven? So the groups that are most vulnerable to floods are slum communities. So you can find these along railways, rivers, or canal banks. So whenever you have flooding, these are the ones that are affected the most because they're the closest, they're on the lowest land. Also, housing estates, they're going to fill them with sand first. So they're going to be higher. So the water will go to the slum communities. In Latin America, actually, they live along hillsides. And so they're prone to landslides. And they can't afford, and the government doesn't provide enough public housing in these countries. But also they want to live there because it's close to their workplace. So the vulnerability is uneven. The urban poor are the most affected. And that's one reason is because where do they located? A lot of them are located in the outer areas in Bangkok, for example, or in Manila, or right along the coasts. They're also in the outer area. Because the price of land is the most expensive in the city center, so they're going to kick the slums out where it's cheaper. So here you can see a map of the slums in Bangkok, and Don Mueang is where the old airport is. And this area was the one that was flooded the most in 2011 during the floods. But also, as I said, they're on the lowest lying land. So even within each district, they are flooded the most. So here, this is a low-income community in Thailand. And so this area is public land. This is owned by the Royal Irrigation Department. So it's free for them to stay there. The problem though is the government can evict them at any point. And so their houses are actually over into the canal, as you can see right here. And so they're going to be flooded the most. But then the government also blames them for the flooding because they say, They're blocking the waterways. And so, as I said, the last reason is they don't own the land. So it means they can be evicted at any time. And so Manila, in 2010, there were bad floods there, and the government kicked out a lot of these people and put them on the outsides. And so they do that to build shopping complexes, riverfronts, and bike lanes in these cities. So the governance, how does the government manage urbanization? There's a number of similarities. So one is a lack of planning. There's no land use plan. So ideally you would set some green areas. You can put the floodwater here. You have some parks. You have areas where you can store water. But these cities had very weak land use plans. Basically, they let real estate developers build as much as they want. Or they had loopholes. Or they gave kickbacks, which means like bribes, to local governments to give out permits. And so they didn't consider disaster risk reduction. So as an example, this is in Thailand, in Bangkok. This area was supposed to be, this is the land use city, this is the city plan. So the darker area means you can develop more. So this would be like condominiums, offices. This would be low density housing. And this area, not supposed to build anything. But then my friend and his wife did an investigation, and they found 28,000 houses had been built there. So the government did not control. So this area was badly flooded. And then finally, another issue is the government has, particularly the municipal governments, or the city governments, have limited capacity. And so the private sector has resisted urban planning. And so this means that there's been a lot of expansion. And then also the middle class itself they wanted to develop. And so they pushed for the governments not to control. And so they're the ones who benefited the most. The real estate developers, the factory owners, they made the most money from these cities' urbanization. And then the poor were neglected. They were allowed to live in slums, which was temporary because they could be evicted. But also, there's not enough rural development. In Thailand, for example, they had a tax on rice for a long time. And so this meant more people moved to the city centers, and that meant that the cities expanded even more and made them more vulnerable to flooding. So remember at the beginning, I said that the problem with the solution is that they blame climate change. They don't blame the urban development or the management, the disaster management. So there's a Thai idiom that says you scratch where it doesn't itch. So this means that you're going to turn to infrastructure, like building flood walls. So there was, in Indonesia, in Jakarta, they proposed this huge seawall. It looked like a bird, actually. I'm sorry I don't have a photo of it. It's called the Great Garuda Seawall. But the problem is, the main problem in Jakarta with flooding is the sinking. And this would only stop the flooding from the coast. Well, thank you. I'll just take a break. Fortunately, there was much opposition, and they stopped this project. And Manila, as I said, they evicted people because they blamed them for the flood. And in Bangkok, they stopped to keep the water out. So after these Japanese factories were flooded, they built 3-meter high, it's about flood walls around the factories. So people couldn't even go out for their lunch break unless they had a ladder. So this is good for the Japanese factories, but the problem was it made flooding worse for those outside the factories. Or this is a map of Bangkok, and they raised these roads around Bangkok. And so they raised them 2.5 meters. So here you can see people on the other side of the road. And they can't even access it, it's higher than their house. And they weren't happy, the government didn't ask them about the road, they just raised them. The other issue is that even though they blame climate change, I'm not saying that, I mean, of course, I believe that China, the US, India needs to do more, but these governments also, they blame the flooding on climate change, but then internationally, they don't raise their commitments. Like, for example, this is to phase out coal. So it seems to be just an excuse. Like, if it's our fault, then we should do something about it. So I'm going to end by proposing some solutions, though, what can be done. So you need to buy back land in vulnerable areas if possible. Make those into parks or green space. Stop development in these areas. You need a lot more green spaces. As I said, like parks or wetlands. Improve building code regulations. Give more room to river. So this is what happened in Netherlands. So Netherlands used to be famous for building the dikes. But actually they pushed the dike back. They gave more room for the river. So that means that there would be less problem about flooding. So that's basically the idea that we need to live with water, not fight water. And in Thailand, they have this Ban Mang Khom project, which means secure housing. And so this is to help slum communities. So they establish savings groups and register as a cooperative. And they pool their resources together. They all put in a little money every month. And then the government gives them some funding to upgrade their housing and their infrastructures. Right, so then they manage the budget themselves and they secure communal land titles. So here you can see what the housing looked like now. And so I talked to these communities and they said we had very little flooding. You can see the trash outside our house is much less than the other communities. So you can see on the other side, they look like this. So this is a successful project. In Jakarta, here they're trying to build something similar as well to help fight flooding. So actually what they did was they said, okay, we support this candidate. If we vote for you in the mayor election, you need to help us out. And so they're talking about affordable housing programs, legalizing the land, business licensing for street vendors. And at the city level, you need green infrastructure. The problem in the US, though, in other cities, is that governments make tax money from converting land for development. And they use that money to maintain roads, provide education. So if you turn the land back, what can you do? So one idea is to connect green infrastructure to urban agriculture. So preserving mangroves, to support local fishery, support coastal adaptation. Japan has wetland restoration to support rice paddies. But also urban gardens, urban agriculture. This also is good for flood. So rooftop gardens, for example, can be helpful for flood reduction. Community gardens. And then also watershed planning. So this is what's happened in Thailand now. They've actually put some land up above Bangkok in Ayutthaya. And that area, they're going to put the flood water. And they give money to farmers. So this is thinking about the whole watershed. And also to preserve wetlands, to store water. And then finally would be China's Sponge City project. Well, it's not perfect. It's very good in terms of amount of permeable space, the amount of water that the city can hold. So you have gardens, green roofs, urban wetlands. And so the idea is that Sponge comprise 20% of urban space, so that 80% of annual precipitation is stored. And And so here you can see, this is in China what they're doing. So, once again, I don't think climate change is not a problem. It is a problem. But I also think that each city is vulnerable because of how they have developed. And also the governance or the management of all the cities. And so some cities are less vulnerable or more vulnerable. So I think that if you just blame only climate change, that deflects from just doing things as usual. So it's not only environmental causes, but also social causes. And so in these cities, powerful groups have profited from changes to the environment, from changes in real estate, industry. The government itself has contributed to flooding by not stopping land use planning or reducing green space and allowing groundwater pumping. So this high degree of inequality contributes to unequal production of vulnerability and hence injustice. As I said, that groups should be flooded equally, not just poor people. And so research then and solutions must be social and political. And more must be done to attribute damages to the cause of vulnerabilities in each place. So I tried to go, I think I was probably a bit too quick, sorry. This is the third time I've given this talk. I gave this talk in London School of Economics, also in Toronto. So I'm happy to give it here. So yes, I'm happy to answer. If you have any questions for me, that's my email address. This talk is actually based on a book chapter that I wrote. I don't want to discuss Phnom Penh. I don't want to get in trouble. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about Bangkok, Jakarta, and Manila.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Dr. Max, for very short, informative presentation about flood damage, about the vulnerability of urban mega city, three Southeast Asian countries, Jakarta, Bangkok, or is Manila. Okay, នេះជាបទបង្ហាញរបស់ខ្លីគាត់ជាអ្វីដែលគាត់បានសិក្សាអ្វីដែលគាត់បានធ្វើការសិក្សាប្រៀបធៀបអំពីភាពងាយរងគ្រោះទឹកជំនន់ហើយក៏តើទឹកជំនន់ដែលកើតឡើងនៅក្នុងទីក្រុងមហានគរទីក្រុងធំៗ Mega City ទីក្រុងធំៗទាំង3នៅក្នុងប្រទេសអាស៊ីអាគ្នេយ៍មានទីក្រុងបាងកកមានទីក្រុងយ៉ាកាតាមានទីក្រុងម៉ានីលឃើញខ្លះគាត់ចង់លើកបង្ហាញថាទឹកជំនន់ឬក៏អ្វីដែលធ្វើឲ្យកូនខាតទីក្រុងហ្នឹងមិនបន្ទោសមកពីអីទេការប្រែប្រួលអាកាសធាតុដែលធ្វើឲ្យមានទឹកជំនន់ទេគឺទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងគឺវាកើតឡើងដោយទីក្រុងកតាសង្គមកតានយោបាយទីផ្សេងគឺវាព័ន្ធទៅនឹងការរកផលចំណេញឬក៏ការទទួលបានផលប្រយោជន៍ពី business person ឬក៏ពី elite អ្នកដែលធ្វើការងារអភិវឌ្ឍទីក្រុងអភិវឌ្ឍពលរដ្ឋអភិវឌ្ឍอะไรមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលពាណិជ្ជកម្មផ្សេងៗអញ្ចឹងកុំឲ្យថាអីបន្ទោសនឹងទឹកជំនន់មកពីអីគេការធ្វើការស្ទាលទឹកជំនន់បន្ទោសហើយបន្ទោសដែរទេវតាទៅទឹកជំនន់ទេវតាដែរឯងមិនដឹងផងបាទព្រោះទឹកជំនន់ផងព្រោះគេតែនិយាយគ្នាអញ្ចឹងតែនិយាយគ្នាថានេះអ្នកនិយាយពីគេថានេះផោមសុយលោកគេថាអត់ទេខ្ញុំមិនខ្មោចទេតែមកនិយាយថាខ្ញុំមានផោមផងមកឆ្លើយវិញគេថាគេអត់មានផោមផងអញ្ចឹងគឺខ្ញុំដូចជាចូលបទបង្ហាញថាបន្ទោទឹកជំនន់ណាក៏មកពីអីគេមកពីយើងចង់បានការអភិវឌ្ឍយើងចង់បាន បាននៅផលប្រយោជន៍ច្រើនពីក្រុមហ្នឹងដែលប្រែคลายឬក៏ដែលធ្វើឲ្យប្រព័ន្ធហេដ្ឋារចនាសម្ព័ន្ធមួយចំនួនត្រូវកែសម្រួលឬក៏ត្រូវយកទី green space នៃ green space ហ្នឹងទៅអភិវឌ្ឍទៅអញ្ចឹងគឺអាចមកពីអាចដល់គេទឹកច្រើនមកអាចលិចអញ្ចឹងក្នុងទីក្រុងយើងក្នុងពេញក៏ជាករណីមួយល្អដែរពីមុនយើងរត់ឡើងបងនេះបងណាបងនេះដីសើមបងដីសើមបងមកមួឥឡូវយើងត្រូវប្រែคลายទៅជាទីប្រជុំជនគឺជាចំណុចមួយដែលបាត់បង់ទៅស្ទរទឹកសម្រាប់ពេលទឹកលឿនមកដែរនឹងដូចជាចំណុចមួយនៃដែរដូចនៅស្រុកគេបានទៅបានបង្ហាញគេកំពុងតែ restore កំពុងតែ start ឡើងវិញតើតំបន់ណាខ្លះដែលគេគូអនុវត្តទៅជាមានលើឋានមានមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលផ្សេងៗហើយកន្លែងណាខ្លះទៀតដែលគេត្រូវកែសម្រួលវានឹងឲ្យជាទៅជាតំបន់ដែលអាចចាប់ទឹកទុកបានជាអីក្នុងស្ពង city នៅចិននេះឡើយគេធ្វើមិនថាឲ្យទឹកភ្លៀងមកអាចចាប់ទឹកភ្លៀងហ្នឹងដូចជាយើងអត់មានមកយើងពីប៉ុងណាហ្នឹងស្ពងហ្នឹងប៉ុងទឹកវាមកគឺមានអីគេមានតំបន់ទៅសើមស្រុកទឹកមួយចំនួនសម្រាប់លិចឬក៏ឲ្យគេធ្វើការដល់គេថាដល់ផ្សេងៗគឺគាត់ថាគឺគេអនុវត្តគេ nature based solution គឺមានដោះស្រាយដោយធម្មជាតិធម្មតាមនុស្សយើងតាំងពីដើមរៀងមកយើងកើតឡើងទុកចិត្តទៅលើធម្មជាតិណាយើងបានអីគេបានផលប្រយោជន៍យើងបានដែលទទួលបាននៅអាហារការពាររាងកាយពីចម្រោះពីធម្មជាតិអញ្ចឹងគឺឥឡូវយើងត្រូវឲ្យធ្វើម៉េចការពារធម្មជាតិមកវិញដើម្បីឲ្យយើងទទួលបាននៅផ្ដុំនីយកម្មជាមួយធម្មជាតិលោកអញ្ចឹងពិភពលោករាល់ថ្ងៃនេះគេកំពុងអីគេកំពុងពិនិត្យមើលតើគូ bring back ធម្មជាតិមកវិញដើម្បីឲ្យមានសក្តិនីយកម្មជាមួយនឹងការអភិវឌ្ឍជាមួយមនុស្សអញ្ចឹងគឺនៅអឺរ៉ុបនៅអាមេរិកនៅផ្សេងៗគេព្យាយាមមកវិញព្រោះថាមនុស្សគឺជាផ្នែកនៃធម្មជាតិអញ្ចឹងយើងមិនអាចខ្លាចធម្មជាតិចោលអស់ទៅហើយយើងរស់នៅបានអញ្ចឹងគឺ bring back មកវិញនេះគឺរៀបរាប់ថាបានខ្មែរយើងកម្ពុជាយើងក៏ទៅពិចារណា bring មកវិញទៅយើងបង្កើតនេះគម្របព្រៃឈើទៅជាប្រមាណ200គឺជាផ្នែកមួយដែលយើង bring nature វិញនេះគឺជាហើយយើងសង្ខេបកន្លែងបទបង្ហាញគាត់ដែលគាត់បានបង្ហាញណាវាបង្ហាញគឺសង្ខេបប៉ុណ្ណឹងឡើយហើយកុំឲ្យថាពេលទៅព្រោះនោះទោះថាខ្លាចនឹងឆេនទោះពីអីគេពីសេតកេសគុំពីបែបបទទោះពីអីគេ lifestyle របស់យើងចង់បានផងដែរពេលឥឡូវយើងដល់វេទិកានៃ Q&A ណា question and answer question មកពីមានសំណួរសួរគាត់ព្រោះគាត់ធ្វើការងារសាស្ត្រទៅក្នុងវេទិកា City ពាក់ព័ន្ធเป็นគិតងាររកគ្រោះដោយមុននឹងគិតគ្រោះដោយការប្រកួតប្រជែងរបស់ក្រុមទាំង3ណាផ្សេងទៀតវាស្រួលលើគួរសួរគាត់ណាបងហ៊ានមិនអត់នេះទេសពប្រាប់គ្នាយើងទៅគឺគួរយើងទៀតណាobserve សំអល់អាឡា observe ស្ព័ននេះហើយសពប្រាប់គាត់ឲ្យជួយសួរបានទៀតណាអូខេអរជើញយើងណានេះស្រួលសួរ គាត់របត់បង្ហាញមួយចំនួនដែលយើងថាមកយល់ដល់នេះចង់សួរបន្ថែមឲ្យគាត់ឃើញហ្វាយហើយពាក់ព័ន្ធទៅនឹងឧបសគ្គរបស់គាត់រឿងហ្នឹងមានអីមានអីសួរហ្វាយ
Oh yes.
Okay, Ulu, please.
What is Ulu and studying master degree and biodiversity conservation. So what I'm interested in is the slum and the solution is to locate in the slum or try to reduce them or live somewhere. And another one is to restore the land or resources. So what if we provide some subsidy to the slum and let them take care of the green space or restore the land? This is the solution. And another one, if we study and we know some idea that supposed to be a reservoir or water storage, what if we moving or taking care of the space in terms of land regulation and moving them to somewhere else and have similar price in terms of real estate that is it better or what we do expanding to smaller city and taking care of other cities.
Okay, those are good questions. I like your question. So for the slums, the first question is, can you subsidize them? So there's a model now in rural areas that you pay people to take care of trees, deforestation, or mangroves, right? Because they can be carbon credit. But I don't think many people have talked about taking care of waterways or wetlands for flooding. And I think it would be a good idea, but the problem is who will pay? Who's going to pay them? I mean, where will the money come from? Will it be tax money? So I think that's the issue. The other issue is that urban land can be worth a lot. It can be very valuable. So there's pressure to develop. So I think people have to realize the threat of flooding, or they have to somehow price into flooding, into management of slums. But yes, I mean, one thing that slums could do is they could organize together. They can advocate, try to form networks, trying to push for their land rights. So something like this, right? In Thailand. I mean, that's different, right? They're not taking care of it. But this water is also cleaner, right? Because they're not littering as much. They're not putting the stuff. And so if they could to have this type of housing. But the other option would be to build public housing for them. You know, they have a lot of public housing in Hong Kong, a lot of public housing in Singapore. And so if you could, but the problem is you need to find land for the public housing. Ideally, that public housing would be in the city. So your second solution is to move them outside. So they've done that in Manila, and the people are not happy. They say some of them, they have to travel 4 hours every day to get to their former workplace. There needs to be jobs nearby. But actually, what people are doing in some of these cities is moving out. The fastest growing cities in the world are not these big cities, actually. It's the smaller cities, like the Battambongs, the Khon Kahns, the Chiang Mai's. Those ones are growing faster because these big cities have so many problems, right? Jakarta is moving its capital. I don't think with the new president, they're talking about moving the capital because Jakarta has so many problems. So ideally, yes, you could, if you can provide jobs, if you can move development to these second cities, then people wouldn't have to move to the big cities. So the issue is, right, you have to have livelihoods. Like if you kick, one reason people still want to live along these areas is because it's close to their jobs, where they work. And so if you kick them out, like they had problem in Manila, you need to have jobs for them. But yes, good questions. It's not easy.
I want to clarify.
Okay.
Land regulation. If the place is supposed to be a reservoir to store water, what if the government like control the price of the real estate, like the value of the land, for example,
So what they do in the U.S. actually is they have something called flood insurance. So if the area, right now in the U.S. we have a lot of hurricanes, right? I mean, hurricanes coming off the Atlantic coast, and they're destroying houses right on the sea. And so the government says, we're going to stop insuring you, or you're going to have to pay a lot every year if you want to continue to build there. So that's not exactly the same thing as you're talking about, but it's one control, one way of using insurance. But yes, you could say, all right, we're going to have a moratorium. You cannot build any land nearby this waterway. That would be one thing to do. We're going to control that. Some cities have done that as well. Yes?
Okay, please. Yeah.
My name is Dan. I am more in sociology and law background, but recently interested in climate change, environmental justice, and so on. My question is in the pictures of Bangkok that you mentioned in the 1960s. It's a small area of flood, and then it's brought out with this present day. So now, for example, the area nowadays is comparatively to that in 1960. So we still have the adjunct area, adjunctive area. So like, the flood used to be this small, and now it's this big. But can we do anything in the surrounding area at the moment? For example, now they're not yet developed. For example, in Bangkok, the area that is developed is already developed, but the suburb now they become suburb. For example, can you do anything around the city so that it can keep the status to be like in the 1960s, so that this is not flooded, or the infrastructure is good enough? Can we build infrastructure to release this water flooding? For example, in Phnom Penh, you don't want to talk about Phnom Penh, but it's not right to be in Phnom Penh and not talking about Phnom Penh. Okay. We have been talking about the infrastructure, especially about the water release, about the field, landfills, and so on and so forth. So do you think building like in Bangkok now, how about Bangkok? It's more safe. Can Bangkok build the infrastructure that can release the water so that it doesn't flood? I know they already have destroyed the Chao Phraya river already. Now it's a big wastewater canal rather than a river.
Okay, it's a good question. So what they've decided to do is, so the biggest, well, there's two, when you talk about flooding, there's three types of flooding. So one will come from the coast. That's not a problem in Bangkok. There's not a lot of tide. In Jakarta, that's a big problem, in Manila. The second is from the river, right? When the river overflows. That was the big problem in 2011. And the third is rainfall, when you just have too much rain and there's nowhere for the water to go. So they've mostly addressed the second type from the river. And so what they've done is they built these roads, raised the roads. And then they're storing water right around here. This is farmland. And they're basically diverting the water there. The problem is the farmers aren't happy. They say they want to grow rice. They're not making as much money. I mean, they get some money from the government. The government compensates them. But they're saying, it's not fair that every year I have to just, flood my fields. But the good thing is that there hasn't been a major flood since 2011. This year there was bad flooding in Chiang Mai, but not in Bangkok. The problem though, is whenever you have rainfall, just a little bit of rain, you can get, you can get, cars can be damaged, because there's no green space. Bangkok has the least amount of green space of all major cities in Asia. I think it's like 3 meters, and then Singapore is 35 per person. So, what we would need to answer your question would be, you could restore canals. If you rebuilt some of these canals, try to restore them. If you put some of this area and allow just low density But the problem is, you know, people, they want to make money from land that's not developed, so you would need to control it. And then how can you grow the economy? I mean, it's not, there's no easy, I mean, you can't completely blame them because you understand that you also still want to grow the city out. But the problem is there's very little consideration of flooding. So that means that in the future, if there is heavy rainfall, like if there is bad flooding again, then these outer areas could be badly flooded. And you saw that in Chiang Mai this year. So, I think you need to make this area right here more resilient to floods. So more green, nature-based solutions, and restoring waterways. And that would be like the old relationship they had with floods. Like if you look at photos from Bangkok from over 100 years ago, people lived on the river, on the canals. They had boats. That was the main way to travel again. And so yeah, now it's, of course, it's changed a lot. So for Phnom Penh, you could at least store some water outside the city. You could find places to divert water. I think that would help. Yes?
Please, some more.
Thank you so much. I'm more from first cohort of master program in climate science. And very happy with school to join the Seminar and to learn more on climate change. I have two big interesting one is regarding to the environment for justice. That is my question is different. What is the difference between environmental justice and ecosystem payment? That is we call like the people need to pay back to the natural, like they take care of the natural. That is what is the difference between climate change justice or environmental justice and ecosystem payment?
Payment for ecosystems?
Just payment service for ecosystem. And the other thing is I'm really interesting about what you do that like the climate change not impact to the city. Actually, it is not 100% event climate change not impact because the light is Cambodia, for example, in Phnom Penh. Mostly we always affect by flood almost a year by rainfall. But actually, we agree that it's related to the development because we don't have a canal to release water after rainfall. But we observe that like the parliament around the city, we don't yet have a development. But actually, they all also impact flood from the water. As you see, maybe not different from the biodiversity because something installed in the long river and the lowland and also affect from the highland area of the rural like the Penh people also have affected by flood, maybe related to climate change, related to climate change. So I still have a perception climate change.
So I think to your second point, I would not disagree that climate change is making flooding worse. I think if you look at the data, there's going to be more extreme rainfall events. In some areas are dry, some areas are getting more rain. But 100% climate change is going to cause more storms, more typhoons, cyclones. So, but my point is that if you only blame climate change, you're not going to change the way you develop your cities. So I'm trying to push to change development patterns. I mean, because if you just say, oh, it's only nature, then it's not our fault. But I'm saying, yes, it's nature, it's climate change, but it's also the way you develop your cities. And so that's why adaptation is part of it, but it's how you adapt. What's the difference between payment for ecosystem services and environmental justice? So I guess the idea of payment for ecosystem services is, you pay somebody to flood their farmland, you pay somebody to not chop their trees, you pay somebody to preserve their mangroves. So one is the payment fair? Is that enough money? Who determines that? I mean, it's still, I mean, but that's also the idea that it should be part of the economy. Environmental justice is the idea that, I mean, distribution. So, what will these people do? Is it fair to them? Were they consulted in the price? Do they even want to be part of this system? Because I talked to some people in Thailand, they said, we don't want to be paid for our mangroves. We just want, you know, to keep them as it is. We don't want to be part of that. And the last, are people recognized? Are they just seen as, you know, people that we're going to pay? Do they even have a say in the process? So I guess payment for ecosystems can be just, but sometimes it's not fair. And so environmental justice is tries to be more encompassing. Oh, you had your hand in the back.
Question?
Yeah. Oh, I saw you raise your.
Khi miền Việt Nam có miền này số đấy, cái quan là cái này, anh chơi cái con cái này, mặc ra anh đưa phong chiết ra, bao bì, hàng ra, cái ông như cái số ya so we so ra, vừa là anh đưa con nó tụi anh gọi là cái solution nữa, cái mất.
Well, I forgot to say, actually, this chapter was cited by the IPCC in their report on cities. So this is, yeah. So this work is actually part of the IPCC now, about the problems of development and how to develop differently. Oh yes.
Okay, please.
Maybe just not maybe fair.
Yes.
Could be
Oh.
just and fair, maybe different.
Yes, I mean, I guess the idea of justice is more encompassing, that it includes not just distribution, but it's like the procedure, and it's also, I think, taking into account like cultural issues as well, taking into account, I mean, do these people just, I mean, like, are they given, I guess it's part of the problem is putting a price on something. That's one of the issues with payment for ecosystem services, is putting a price on nature. There's a lot of critiques of that. It's like, how much is a forest worth? You know, how much are mangroves worth? And so I think that's the issue with part of the critiques of payment for ecosystem services. But also the idea that people are kind of just, they're stuck to this kind of idea. Oh yes, it's a good question about fairness versus justice. Any undergraduate students?
Yeah, student.
You can ask in Khmer, and it can be translated.
Dạ, lâu nhưng bác số ông lấy số 2 bán tôi ra đây rồi. Nó lấy những số bán. Vậy mà như thế thì số 2 bán tôi cô nhưng có ra. Cô nhưng mấy cô đều biết vì là tôi có ra và thì ngồi dưới mấy cái nhưng mà hiện có gì là ông một tô ra đây thì ông một tô cao đua cao thiết hoặc cái lĩnh vực của cái đường đua thì trong một tô gì là ra đua cao thiết nó lên chất một tô một tiếng cái chó phải là bạn là gì một tô là lên bao nhiêu trên thì trong đường lên chất lên là bao nhiêu trên như công ty người ta đúng người ta vô bài và tôi có dễ cả ăn vót cà phê dùng cà phê tiền tất rồi cà phê là những miếng này rồi không biết cái này nên đấy nó chỉ cái miếng nuôi xuống kiểu đi chơi.
Thank you, that they need all the presentation. I'm working from District University Domain. I had interesting your article research about global health in Thailand.
About haze.
About health, yes. I would like in article in global health and about your chronic air pollution in the Thailand. Have you compared for your research air chronic pollution in Cambodia? Because in Cambodia is a low income developed country, so I believe you have important aspect for your chronic air pollution. Yes, thank you for.
Okay, thank you. Yes. So air pollution. So I've also written about air pollution in Thailand, and I also did research on air pollution in Laos. And I think in Cambodia it's getting worse. Is that right? I saw last year was quite bad in Phnom Penh. So air pollution is caused by three major factors in Thailand. One is transport. A lot of old cars, and then there's not enough public transport. So that's one reason it's getting worse. The second is industry, factories. There's not much regulation on factories in Thailand. They don't have anything to stop them from polluting. And then the big one, which I think is most relevant to Cambodia, is agriculture, agricultural burning, which is seasonal. Every season they burn the crop afterwards. And so what happened in Laos, which I think might be similar to Cambodia, was there was a lot of planting of cassava. And so this meant that they cleared the forests. They burnt the forests for cassava production, but also maize, corn, particularly in the mountainous areas. And the problem is you can't put machines there. And so when you grow maize, and then the sugarcane is the third major crop. So in Chiang Mai, tourists have stopped going to Chiang Mai because the air pollution is so bad. Chiang Mai was ranked top 5 in the world for air pollution last year during certain times of the year. So the main issue is the burning of the crops. So you need to, like maize, for example, is very high in the highland areas. But the other issue is it comes from other countries, like Myanmar. It blows into Thailand. And so you need to provide alternatives to farmers so they can grow crops that don't require the burning, or find ways that they can rotate their crops, or use like the remains, the burning areas for other things, like biochar. And so if you get like biochar would be good for the rural areas. So they can convert that into energy, for example, bioenergy. Then they don't have to burn. So those would be the things that would help, I think, Cambodian farmers, provide them alternatives to burning. But yes, it's not easy, but I think there are certain ways out there. But yes, air pollution is also tied to climate change, because the same things that are causing air pollution is also causing carbon emissions as well. So you noticed air pollution here. And your ministry is working on air pollution now?
My ministry focus on job in the rural, hygiene and water. Water in Cambodia, I think my ministry focus on environment.
Thank you for your question. Oh yes, one right here.
Good afternoon. My name is Lily, and I am a sophomore in the Department of Urban Planning. So I would love to appreciate your presentation today. I learned a lot. So I have about one big question and two small questions.
Okay.
So the first question is that you were talking about Jakarta is relocating their cities. So and also what I've
questions. Is it a good idea to move your capital? Brazil has moved their capital. Myanmar moved their capital most famously to Naypyidaw. Jakarta has talked about moving it, but now they have a new president. And I think he hasn't talked about as much as the previous guy. Bangkok, they just talked a little bit, but I don't think they've been very serious. I don't think it's a good idea, if possible. So for Jakarta, if they built the new capital, you'd have to destroy a lot of forests, rainforests, to do it. But also to move all the government offices, their families. What are you going to do? Instead, I think it's a lot better to try to improve your own city. And what would be better actually was to improve the rural areas, to improve the secondary cities. So then there would be less pressure on these big cities. If you have more better rural development, then not as many people would want to live in the mega cities. And you could spread it out more, and then that would have less pressure on the environment. But also, just good urban development. If you could preserve more green spaces, actually shrink these cities if possible, then that would be much better, I think. Because it's very expensive also to move your cities. For Myanmar, I think it was partly because of military. I think the junta now is going to coup up in Naypyidaw and stay there. So military would be one reason. It depends, but yeah, I think for the case of Indonesia, it's not a good idea. The other question, one was about rooftop. I'm sorry, the other one?
The second one is about the road that will hide.
Oh, the roads. What can you do for those people out here? It'd be much better to talk to them before you build the roads. So what they did was, they had these public consultations, but they only consulted the people inside the roads. It's very tricky about the Thai government here. They didn't consult the people outside the roads. So ideally you would ask people first, do you want these roads built and all high? So what can you do then, now that they've already been built? It's not easy. One, you can give them money, which is not great for flooding. Second, you could probably, it's also expensive to raise their own houses. So there's actually no really easy, once you build the roads, they're kind of in trouble already. But yes, at least help them raise their own houses, ideally. Yeah.
It means they build a road block or something can be like one block, or you think that getting the road like that for preventing the flood?
Yeah, so this idea is the roads will prevent any water coming to this side. So Bangkok is right here, this is outside Bangkok. So, part of the justification is Bangkok is worth more economically. So they call it cost-benefit analysis, which is very commonly used. So the idea is you would compensate these people, but their losses would be less than those in Bangkok. But yes, it's from a justice perspective, it's problematic. Rooftop gardens, why are they good? They can absorb rainwater. So they can, the soil, the plants, they can catch rainwater. And so that's why they're good for flooding. Right here, right? So you can see here, right? This would absorb some of the rainwater and wouldn't run off into there. But yes, it wouldn't be so helpful for river flooding, but for flooding from rain, that's why they're useful. But they're also good for building community, for growing your own vegetables, but yes, it's not a big, it's not like a big solution, but it can be a little helpful in terms of flooding. This is New York City right here. Yes? Good questions? Oh yeah?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Vietnam from Penh and Dublin. I have two questions, but I also interested in Phnom community. So the first one is about how can social system be improved to better support and climate resilient for poor community. And the second one is about what specific intervention can ensure that people not left behind.
Okay, good question. So
Okay. You can mention about the country like you mentioned before, and you can mention what people did.
Okay. So for slum communities, there should be two types of interventions. One is, as you can see, these governments unfortunately don't help them enough. So NGOs and slums themselves need to take actions. I mean, this is quite difficult work to build this. Some communities don't, but one thing would be, for example, community-based early warning systems. You map out your own communities. So, like, which areas are most vulnerable? Do you know where the elderly are? Because elderly are the ones who die the most during the flooding. So make sure you can map them out and know which households, because some of them might not even know about the flooding. You can also have social safety nets, like your own savings groups. And so you can give those who are affected some money. But yeah, I mean, this would be the best, but it's quite difficult, right? I mean, to do, this is a lot of money, it takes a lot of investment to save yourselves. You can also, as I said, they did in Jakarta, where they said we're only going to vote for one candidate. But yeah, I mean, so the other thing though is what can governments do? Governments themselves can provide social safety nets. Governments can help improve early warning systems. Governments can, and the most important thing is to ask them, what do you want? Participatory planning. You know, what should we do? You know, ask them themselves instead of saying we know what's best for you. I mean, do you want to move? Do you want to stay here? But of course, public housing would be very good. If you had public housing, which would be safer, then they don't have to live in slums. I mean, I don't think most people would want to live there, it's just they can't afford anywhere else. So if you had built apartments, built areas that were safer, but also nearby where they work, that's the issue of land. That's why it's quite difficult, is the issue of land. But yes, in Manila too, they've tried to push for advocacy, saying we won't resettle. There's some, So NGOs have done a lot as well in trying to help some communities. So yeah, I think a good one here is STT. But yes, communal land title. Land titles is probably the most important thing for slums. If they have ownership of their land, they can feel more secure. Then they can build there. Because if you don't have the land title, you can be kicked out at any moment. So why would you build much there? Why would you invest in your housing if you don't have any security? So trying to push for land titles or having the government legalize the land, that's very helpful for these communities. But of course, vocational training, livelihood support, that is also useful as well. Good questions, yes. So it's not easy.
Maybe one more question, because it's time's up, right? If you have one more question, now you can roll more tiếp đấy. Roll tiếp của you. Mau seminar nó mau saya ganti question tao tí interesting. You very interesting yeah. Trong learn more.
Oh, this guy right here, yeah.
Okay, please. Last question, please.
Last question, last but not least.
Yeah.
I got a short question. So, the Jakarta city can keep sinking, or is it other country city can keep sinking?
So yeah, so the sinking of Jakarta is due, one, to climate change, right? Sea level rise. But seas have not risen that much so far. They likely will rise more as the glaciers melt. But the major problem in Jakarta, let me go back to the slide, is groundwater pumping. They don't have good supply of drinking water. And so they just keep on pumping the groundwater, and if you pump the groundwater, it sinks the land. The soil is less compact, clay. So what they really need to do actually is improve their water supply system. So people will actually have good, reliable source of drinking water. And then they don't pump the land. That's the major thing. I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, to develop a whole water system. But that's why Jakarta has sunk the most. And so if you look actually right here, I'm sorry I don't have a photo, you can see actually the coast is higher than these people's houses. So if you just have a little bit of water, like if you have a storm surge, it goes right into these people's. So what they were proposing to do was to build this big seawall right here. So in some ways that's useful, but the water also comes from up here, down here. So that wouldn't solve that. So the major driver is the subsidence, is the groundwater pumping. Skyscrapers also cause, in Bangkok, skyscrapers also cause a little bit land to sink. But yeah, popping is the major issue. Good question. Thank you. I will thank you all for coming. I hope you found it useful. Very good questions. I can also send you my chapter if you want to email me.
You could send to the
Okay, I can send to him too.
You can pop up in the our page. Chứ lưu dùa số tha đi con Jakarta đi con tây tiết keep thinking nên là vì sắp vâng chơi cho bạn mọi anh mới những cái tiện tôn nên là ca practice trong đây chưa cái là practice trong đấy chưa của những cái niveau trong trong đấy ai vừa ao đây vì sót đây vì tập của nó từ đây cắt đôi dương là đánh sạch chứ này đánh sạch là biên tập giờ đó nó hạt này để đánh sạch nó tất cái khôi nhé vì này đẹp chứ cái đôi cô von như cái đó khi một cô phơi vào đó thì tôi nên là cả là nó lên nó thành lơ nó bị ọc đấy họ biên tập về khô tiếp rồi cái foundation rồi bọn ông có ai vì bên cạnh phải luôn rồi sao quá nên tất cả bay rồi cột đầy nó rừng và bây giờ ta tới một số lại làm liên tiếp rồi đã đứng cho người rừng ấy sao liên tiếp lại ở tất này một ở liên tiếp chô máu đây hỏng ra vào và chắc cứ nơi không nó cứ trang ra cứ ta phải mua thiết cái muối cứ đi vô tới đó đi vô tới một lần rồi sai phô nó tập liền chứ tôi tập đi vô một lát rồi cái tập lát hay cái cũng là sang son một lúc cà phê này nó tôi chia tiện tôn là tiền cà phê sạc cam nên từ 50 cam từ 50 mong silver mấy tôi cà phê cũng đấy cà phê tập bộ làm đầy đến chào rồi lịch sập chân đâm trong quanh dưới nó chỉ cao ở đấy cứ rót còn ăn giá tôi một cam tiền thì một lại những bộ nhiều tức là vì học tập tới mình đi vào đây là xa dương mình đi nhìn từ buồn bốc thì niệm buồn thông là chui không tức là đây cái là làm gì tức tụi nó ra bản chân cứ học cũng ra rồi đó nó học lý có tiền số đi dương này đấy mà cho luôn mong là seminar Dr mình lên climate change thì mình đi học mình rồi luôn cái điều luôn trong mega city Phnom Penh quay này thì đây thì sông mai nhưng sông river flow muối mấy họ chung rồi sẽ có lại làm việc liên việc này chỗ là hot muối chung liền được ăn không rồi tập chuyện sao